The space of the atrium, to me, just cried out for an artist commission. Knowing the opportunity existed was only half of it. We needed to fund it. And when donors came forward, Mickey and Jeannie Klein, who have been longtime supporters of the contemporary program at the Blanton, then we started serious conversation. I really wanted to ask an artist who would push the boundaries of how they worked, and who could create not just a work of art, but an experience that transcended expectations of what coming into an art museum should be like, or looking at an object might be like. And Teresita did both those things.
In the late 90s, I made several pieces that were references to empty swimming pools. One in particular was a reference to a design that Adolphe Loos, modernist architect, made for Josephine Baker for a house in Paris that was never built in the 1920s. And it was basically an indoor swimming pool with windows cut into it so that you could look at the swimmer in the space, and it was full of these undertones of voyeurism and narcissism and reflection and seeing oneself in the space and watching other people move through this watery interior. And when I saw the Blanton space, I thought I wanted to bring this reference of mine back again.
And she spent less than an hour in the space and said, it has to be the full space. We have to deal with every wall, top to bottom, around, over, under, through. And we have to situate the viewer, the visitor, as a body in the middle of it.
The material is cast acrylic, and I work on it very much the way a painter would work on a painting. The shifts between the colors were very important for me. Too abrupt and it would look too graphic, too subtle, and it wouldn't create this optical effect.
Teresita was a wonderful artist to work with on a new commission, because every project she does is an experiment for her. It's research and investigation. It's all new.
The whole thing is put together with a tongue and groove method. It's a very simple approach, and it was very effective. It's basically put together the way a floor would be put together, and so I just took this idea of a floor and made it vertical. It was a way of somehow bringing the space together and taking this very complicated space and kind of unifying it into an image. As I moved through the space, I wanted to give meaning to the staircase. Placing the viewer in a moment of being in art and of making art and of being sort of a spectator but also a performer in the act of the piece, and really sort of saturating them in a real-time experience. So as you go up the steps to the second floor, the water line of colored bands around you shifts in relation to your body going up. As you get to the top, you literally kind of step out of this box of water. As I spent time in the space, I was very aware that I was in Texas, and my larger sort of sense of Texas included Marfa and a sense of Donald Judd's presence, and also the particular light and landscape features. When I imagined the piece, I thought I wanted these horizontal bands that referred to a kind of water line that was falling or rising, and essentially what I was doing was stacking color and stacking a gradation of color, and I kind of chuckled to myself about how it was like a Donald Judd. And so I thought, well, you know, in those stacked pieces, you're always somehow on the outside of the stack, looking in at this sort of dynamic element that's happening between the elements of the stack. And in stacked waters, you're really sort of being inserted into that experience. So it's almost like being on the inside of a stack piece. The material itself is reflective, and I was very interested in using the skylights because I thought that of everything in the space, the skylights were the best part in a way, in the sense that the whole space was drenched with light, and I wanted to use that. So the surface of the acrylic changes different times of the day and different times of the year, depending on where the sun is in relation to the wall. So at a very acute angle, it looks like a mirror. It looks very, very shiny and reflective, and you see your own reflection and the reflection of museum goers in the space. So the piece becomes almost like a portrait of the museum being used. At the same time, it becomes a portrait of the changing Texas light. When it's overcast or later in the day, it can be very somber and not reflective at all. And when it's bright and sunny, it can be very shiny and shimmering. In a lot of my work, there's this sense of the doubling of the viewer, this sense of something happening more than once and in very different ways simultaneously. So the viewer is present in the space, the viewer is reflected onto the surface of the space, the viewer watching other viewers is reflected and present on the space, and you have this layering of all of these different moments of action, moments of dynamic action, and I'm interested in that in a kind of ambulatory viewer. So in order to see this piece, you have to move around. It's in that way it becomes almost like film. It becomes almost like a real-time film that's happening as you are in the space, and the surface both reflects, but it also absorbs everything that's happening in the space. This very pared down imagery is what triggers that sense of the viewer creating their own image. And I'm very much interested in creating works that place viewers in the mode of construction and in the place of actually making something from nothing. In general, the way I use images is I use as little as possible. I strip it down until what I have left is just enough to be a catalyst for an emotional response. And it's that emotional response in the viewer that triggers a wealth of imagery that's very rich and that's very specific and very personal. I like it when my works of art don't fall into one category neatly. And so I wanted, in a way, with Stacked Waters, to create something that could be confused for a kind of geometric abstraction and for this kind of very graphic statement. But I also wanted it to sort of teeter on being this completely rendered image of an ancient Roman cistern or a pool, or the most sort of picturesque opposite extreme of what geometric abstraction is. But when I can somehow in the middle be exactly between the two, so that in fact the viewer is continuously moving through this dialogue between the two, it really creates a kind of peripheral buzzing and a kind of a kind of ephemeral quality that you can't quite pinpoint. And that's sort of at the crux of what I'm trying to do.
What an amazing thing to come in and experience when you come to the art museum. How lovely. The pull of color alone sort of entices people into the space, and then the discovery of the material, observation of how it behaves, recognition of the reflections that take place in the space, and I think the most important thing, they slow down. They breathe differently. They respond physically to the work, and that's an amazing way to start a museum visit. So what her work does is kind of this, without words, perfect introduction to what it's like to be with a work of art and what I want from all my other experiences here.